Alright guys, so welcome to this video, the second video. In this video, we are going to talk about strategic HRM, strategic human management. Now remember, in the previous video, we talked about the evolution of human resource management through the years. We talked about in the 1900s, where it began as welfare officers with specific responsibilities, and it evolved into the personal administrator, then the personal manager, then the human resource manager, and it eventually progressed to strategic human resource management, where HRM was seen as a partner to the organization, not just a support function, but a partner to the organization. In this video, we want to talk about strategic HRM, and we're not going to be too textbook in what we're attempting to do, but as a platform to build on, we're going to give a definition to begin with. An overall and coherent long-term planning, shorter-term management, control, and monitoring of an organization's human resources so as to gain from them the maximum added value and best position them to achieve the organization's corporate goals and mission. So there are several parts to this definition. It's an overall and coherent long-term planning, shorter-term management, control and monitoring of an organization's human resources to extract from them the maximum added value and best position the organization to achieve its goals. Essentially, that's a definition that we can work with. Now, it stands to reason that strategic human resource management exists only if the future of the organization is set. As was said here, long-term planning. And the human resource strategies are developed and used to realize the future through the present. So an organization can only be practicing strategic human resource management if long-term planning has been engaged in and the future of the organization has been set. Now, we are doing this program as a means of being able to support the organizations for which we work as internal consultants in improving their HR practices, or any organization that might ask us to look at their human resource practices with a view to improving. So if the organization that you're working for or the organization that you're working with, if they're not starting with the future in mind, if they're not going forward into the future and identifying where the organization would be at a future point, then they are not practicing strategic human resource management. And if you're not practicing strategic human resource management consistent with the evolution of human resource management that we talked about in the previous video, the organization may be stuck in some arrested state and would be sub-optimizing, would not be giving itself the best possible chance of dealing with its competition or growing in ways that it could grow. So one of the first things you must attempt to do is ensure that top management has a clear picture of where they want the organization to go in the future. Now, with that clear picture, there are several goals that should be paid attention to. 3 main goals. Consistent with the organization's vision, mission, and goals, how does an organization attract, develop, and maintain an effective workforce? 3 main goals: attracting, developing, and maintaining an effective workforce. And when we talk about attracting an effective workforce, we are talking about HR planning, looking at what's going on within the organization, what's going on within the external environment, looking at the key things that drive the business, and making those important decisions for the organization. We're also talking about recruitment and selection. Once we are talking about attracting an effective workforce, we are talking about recruitment and selection and what's involved in that. We're going to have discussions on those in subsequent lectures. In terms of developing an effective workforce, we're talking about training, which is preparing individuals for their current positions within the workforce. We're also talking about development, which is preparing individuals for future positions in terms of the direction that the organization is likely to go, or in terms of roles they would be performing at a future point in time. We're also talking about performance management, managing the productivity of each member of staff. And when we talk about maintaining an effective workforce, we are talking about such maintenance through job design to ensure that the jobs are designed in an effective way. We are talking about ensuring that members of staff remain motivated, looking at various theories of motivation. I think we mentioned a few in the previous video where we talked about Maslow's theory, we talked about Clayton Alderfer's two-factor theory, ERG theory, we talked about Herzberg theory, we talked about Victor Vroom, we mentioned a few. And that's all about maintaining an effective workforce. We would also talk about compensation management, because it's persons' wages and salaries that may serve as one of the major determinants in terms of to what extent they would remain working within our company. Now, the premise is, when we're talking about attracting, developing, and maintaining an effective workforce, the premise is the achievement of the desired future for the organization is seen in terms of the ability to manage employees as the only resource that can mobilize and manage other resources. It doesn't matter what else we have going good for us within our organizations. If we are not able to effectively manage our workforce, they would not mobilize and manage the other resources that we have. It doesn't matter what we have going on. I mean, in some measure, we could talk about technology could render that somewhat futile, but that's not the case. It's the behavior of our members of staff which will determine the extent to which all other resources are mobilized and managed within our organization. Failure to make the right choices and the right decisions in terms of people management, and when we say people management, again, we're talking about attracting, developing, and maintaining an effective workforce. Failure to make the right choices in that regard would lead to failure of the future of the organization. Let's talk about how we can execute strategic human resource management. And there are several things that can be done in support of strategy. In support of strategy, one of the first things we would talk about is strategic HRM requires that HR managers understand the business as a whole. And when we say understand the business as a whole, we talked about, or we would talk about at some point, different skills HR managers should possess. Technical skills, people skills, and conceptual skills. And understanding the business as a whole requires conceptual skills. And conceptual skills mean that we understand the various departments that exist within the organization. We have a decent understanding of each department that exists, not necessarily the technical components or the technical aspect, but we have an understanding of the conceptual aspect of each department. Where does each department fit within the organization as a whole? Not only that, how does the organization as a whole fit within the industry? How does the organization compete within the industry? What are the financials that are worth knowing? What are, not so much from a financial accounting perspective, but from a managerial accounting perspective. What's going on with money within the organization, and how do we behave consistent with what's going on with money? HR must be aware of that. HR must know the drivers of the business. Do we need cash in order to run the business efficiently? Would cash flow be a problem? Do we need profits right away in the short term? Do we make certain kinds of decisions to generate profit in the short term? What are the assets that we have? What are the assets that we need? What is going on in terms of technology? So the HR department must understand the business as a whole in order for strategic HRM to be taking place. HR department, HR managers must also be able to focus on key business goals. So top management will make certain kinds of decisions in terms of the direction the organization would be going. These decisions, HR must be kept abreast, must be kept aware, must be aware of all changes in real time as they relate to key business goals. Programs that have the greatest relevance to business objectives should be given priority. In support of strategy, HR must also know what to pay attention to, what to monitor and evaluate. Measurement and evaluation is critical. They must identify the KPIs, the key performance indicators that should be paid attention to, whether it's revenue. Revenue is an important indicator that would say a lot about the business. It could talk in terms of the sales that would be taking place. It could talk in terms of projected profit or loss. It could talk in terms of budgets that would be available to do different things. So revenue is an important metric to measure within the organization. Customer acquisition cost. How much is it costing us to acquire one customer? Or customer satisfaction, are customers satisfied, or do we have a high customer churn, which means that we are losing customers? And if we are losing customers, then we are not going to be enjoying customer lifetime value. And what's customer lifetime value? It's the spending of one customer over the lifetime of the potential lifetime of that customer. So if a customer comes in once a week and spends $100, and that customer would come every week, that's $400 a month. At the end of a year, that's $4,800. And if that customer is likely to behave in that way for 10 years, that's $48,000 if my arithmetic is right. So these are the things that HR managers, HR personnel must be aware of. They must understand the business as a whole. They must be able to focus on key business goals, and they must know exactly what to measure. Of strategy, there's also what is termed as vertical alignment. And vertical alignment is simply HR working with top management to do certain things, to perform certain functions. On the one hand, top management must incorporate HR planning into the process of setting the direction for the organization. And when we talk about HR planning, we are talking about activities such as assessing the internal workforce or scanning the external environment for labor changes, labor supply changes. Now, in terms of assessing the internal workforce, here's an example of how that could work. Periodically, the organization could, the top management together with HR support could review all the CVs, all the curriculum vitae of all members of staff. They could create a skills bank. They could undertake an activity that ensures that persons are placed in positions of strength within the organization, that each person is working to their strength, that there are no square pegs in wrong holes, etc. So all this could form part of the HR planning activities to be engaged in with top management. In terms of scanning the external environment for labor supply changes, there are several things within the external environment that could work to the advantage of the organization. Particularly, let me give you an example. Maybe a month ago or so, a decision was made, or it was advertised by the government that, or by the Ministry of Education, that they would not necessarily be hiring teachers simply because they completed their bachelor's in education. They would only be entertaining or responding to applications that are in response to advertisements that were done by the Ministry of Education. What does that mean? It means that there are about 200 students graduating in terms of their bachelor's of education. So there are 200 teachers coming onto the market every year. And with these 200 teachers coming onto the market every year, the employer of choice for these individuals would be the government. But with the government declaring that we're not going to be hiring these individuals readily, it means that we have a large number of persons with the ability to teach that would be there on the market, which means that an organization can take advantage of that situation by strengthening their human resource development or their human resource training component by getting exceptionally skilled, qualified teachers to be a part of the organization. And because the supply may outweigh demand, they would not necessarily have to pay a premium for these individuals. So that is what is meant by HR supporting top management in scanning the external environment for changes that is likely to benefit the organization. Also, from the perspective of vertical alignment, we're talking about HR supporting top management in integrating all levels of the organization's management hierarchy and functional departments. So an example of that is, I can give an example from an organization called the Youth Training Center. The Youth Training Center is an institution under the prison service, and they would have different batches. A batch comprised of a full team of personnel that would be looking after the institution within a 24-hour period. Now, in terms of HR supporting top management and integrating all levels of the institution's hierarchy, they have something that is called an A-team meeting. An A-team meeting is where the top managers of the respective batches come together with the top management of the prison service as a whole, facilitated by the HR department, to speak in terms of what's going on at the institution, what's going on within the wider prison setting, and what's going on in the external environment, and how the strategies could be improved to greater meet the needs that the organization is intended to carry out. So HR performs that function in terms of its vertical alignment mandate. And finally, in terms of vertical alignment, HR being fully integrated into the strategic planning process. So obviously there's going to be a lot of strategic planning taking place with top management, and HR's invitation to be a part of that strategic planning process is part of the vertical alignment requirement, which is simply all the strategy that is being formulated at the top level. HR is working with the top management to ensure that the best quality of information is brought to bear on that planning process, and all managers are informed in real time in terms of what is required of them and their departments. That's vertical alignment. In addition to vertical alignment, there's a requirement for horizontal integration. And horizontal integration is simply all the functional departments of the organization, HR's effort to maintain that level of partnership with the management of all the functional departments. So everybody is going to know what everybody is doing in terms of departmental interdependence. There's going to be synergy. It's going to be synergistic as opposed to levels of conflict, because HR would be attempting to ensure everything is synchronized and aligned. In terms of horizontal integration as well, talks about HR coordinating the training, developing training programs to satisfy the training requirements of all programs, providing that service to all departments in terms of ensuring their members of staff are properly trained or properly prepared for the functions that they need to carry out. And finally, in terms of horizontal integration, we're talking about HR supporting departments in carrying out critical HRM functions as part of their core function, which might mean HR may be involved in record keeping, attendance. They may be involved in performance evaluation exercises. They may be involved in conducting different kinds of research for the various departments. Basic functions that may be carried out by the respective departments, HR is involved in those functions. So essentially, in terms of executing strategy, we just talked about horizontal integration, we mentioned vertical alignment, we talk about HR managers understanding the business as a whole, possessing conceptual skills, knowing the financials, knowing what drives the organization. We also talk about focus on key business goals and being astute in terms of knowing what to measure within the organization. The final element of our discussion here, we're going to talk about key philosophies of strategic HRM. What thought underpin successful strategic HRM? And there are 6 of them we want to just spend some time on and get a decent understanding of. And we'll end this video perhaps on about 30 minutes with that discussion. So the key philosophies of strategic HRM. 1 is ownership. Strategic HRM recognizes that top management owns and drives the agenda for effective people management within the organization. Traditionally, human resource management was the remit of the personnel department with routine administrative activities. That was back in the 1920s, the 1930s, thereabout. We've come 100 years since then. The new philosophy, human resource management, is and has to be owned and driven by top management in the interests of the key stakeholders of the company. And when we say the key stakeholders of the company, we are talking about shareholders, the board, the workers, clients, customers, suppliers, everybody or persons who we may outsource functions to. They are the key stakeholders, and top management must own and must drive all practices at the organization in the interest of these stakeholders. A second philosophy, business strategy driving HR activities. Business or organizational strategies form the basis for human resource strategies, and there must be a strategic fit. Business or organizational strategies form the basis for human resource strategies, and there must be a strategic fit. Remember, we talked about unless the future of the organization has been envisioned, there could be no strategic human resource management. This is opposed to putting emphasis on routine activities as was done in the past. It's opposed to reactive decision making and limited vision, which characterized the old-time days of personnel management back in the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s at best. If an organization is not allowing business strategy to drive HR practices, their practices are outdated and they cannot compete with organizations that are behaving modern in terms of their practices, in terms of their thinking. If you could convince an organization that you're in a position to assist them in bringing their practices in line with bringing their behaviors in line with current practices, then you would be an asset to the organization. An organization cannot have a strategic approach to managing the workforce without organizational and business strategy. And if you could convince them of that and support them in that regard, then of course you would be a valuable asset. Which brings us to the third philosophy, employees seen as assets. Employees are viewed as critical to organizational success rather than expenses, rather than liabilities. Under traditional personnel management philosophy, training and development of employees was quite often seen as a cost that should be avoided wherever possible. In the new strategic HRM, investment in people, like any other capital investment, is seen as necessary for better returns in the future. An organization that is not willing to invest in its employees, an organization that is seeing an employee as just a cost, it won't be too long before that organization is not getting the best out of its employee. And if it's not getting the best out of its employee, it cannot be as competitive as an organization that might be getting the best out of their employees. Philosophy number 4, achieving high performance. At the heart of strategic HRM, the philosophy is that you must strive to get high performance from your members of staff. You must strive to create a high performing organization. The view must be that getting additional value from employees is a worthwhile goal. Employees must be seen as capable of producing added value, and it is the role of management to obtain such added value through, as we say, human resource development and training, through performance management, through motivation, through compensation management, through job design, through improved quality of work-life or labor relations. So a goal of HR must be to achieve high performance to get the added value from members of staff. The concept of added value suggests that an employee can be stimulated to increased productivity if properly recruited, if properly trained, if properly motivated, if properly compensated. That must be a goal consistent with the philosophy of strategic human resource management. A fifth philosophy is employee commitment. The success of an organization is dependent on employees' commitment towards the organization's mission, goal, objectives, values, culture, vision, etc. A person's quest for significance within an organization is what would allow the organization to really function at its best, to function optimally. Members of staff must be committed in that regard. It is the task of management and human resource management to induce and encourage that kind of commitment, that kind of sustained productivity that would allow the organization to function at the level it's supposed to. And finally, we're going to talk about a strong organizational culture. That's an important philosophy of strategic human resource management. Building a strong organization culture gives managers an advantage in stimulating employees' commitment. Once the culture of the organization is strong, managers have that advantage. And a strong culture could be created by effective communication, training, coaching, mentoring, performance management processes. All these are effective tools for building a strong organizational culture. So essentially, we are saying that in terms of some of the strategies for executing strategic human resource management, in terms of some of the philosophies involved in executing strategic human resource management, the organizations that you're supporting, whether you're operating at the level of an internal consultant, attempting to improve things within your own organization, or you're operating as an external consultant, if we want to call it that, an organization has asked you to support them in improving their HR practices, these are an excellent place to begin, ensuring that the organization that you're looking at is not back in the 1920s or 1930s or 40s, and that they're up to the times. And not only are they up to the times, they're optimizing strategic human resource management. So that brings us to the end of this video. Hope you have a decent understanding of what it takes to move from routine human resource management to strategic human resource management. Until the next video, just keep doing the best you can to support the organization that you're working with. All the best.